Alrighty, good evening, everyone. I see some attendees popping in. My name is Christina Grev, and I'm the Collections and Education Specialist at the Mining and Rollo Jameson Museums. Today is Sunday, March 3rd, and welcome to our second Winter Lyceum presentation of 2024. We definitely have a diverse mix of presentations this year. Going to share this real quick. So our next 3 Lyceum series will be over Zoom every Sunday. So next Sunday, March 10th, Dr. James Thieler will be discussing Native American and Euro-American use of freshwater mussels. On St. Patrick's Day, geologist Billy Fitzpatrick will be presenting on mapping lead zinc deposits around the Highland mining districts. Then historian Robert Humphreys has his presentation on the Welsh and Wisconsin's lead mining region. And finally, skipping over Easter Sunday on April 7th and in person at the museum, I will be presenting on how our collections team helped to preserve our taxidermy collection in the famous boxing squirrels. We invite you to stay up to date on all of our programs and the upcoming events at the museum by checking us out online at our website and by following all of our social media accounts. Additionally, I would like to thank our sponsors whose financial support has made this program possible: Platteville A&W, Inspiring Community, and Park Place Senior Living. We'd like to welcome all of our current friends, members, donors of the Mining and Rollo Jameson Museums. After the presentation tonight, we will be having a Q&A with our presenter, Tom. So there is a Q&A function at the bottom of your screen. At any point during the presentation, if you have any questions, please put them in the Q&A. We'll be trying to answer as many as possible at the end here. So I'm pleased to introduce our presenter for tonight, Tom Pamperin. Tom is a writer, teacher, sailor, and occasional boat builder. He spends his summers sailing small boats on the Great Lakes and the smaller inland waters of Wisconsin, with occasional trips farther afield. His work interviewing wooden boat builders and designers has given him just enough knowledge to be a little bit dangerous. Thank you so much for joining us tonight, Tom.
Oh, thank you. I appreciate the museum and the invitation to be part of this Lyceum. A little unusual compared to the rest of the mix of history and archaeology and science and all that, but hopefully this will inspire some people to learn a little bit about sailing small boats.
Yeah, so we'll switch it over to you.
Great. Well, I'm going to go to screen share in just a moment. I've got some slides up, but thank you for joining us. My hope for this presentation is to just introduce people to the idea that small sailboats are a great way to get out and enjoy Wisconsin and farther afield, like you said in your introduction. And it's a mode of wilderness transportation or travel that I think is really rewarding, and hopefully some of you will be a little bit interested by the time I'm done here. All right, here we go. So here's what we're doing. Landlocked. Wisconsin and the Midwest in general is probably not a hotbed of sailing in most people's minds. But somehow or other, I've got wrapped into this world of small sailboats, taking on some pretty big trips. You can see in this photo here, that's my brother in the boat in front and me in the boat behind, and we are sailing on the waters of the Canadian Great Lakes here. This is Georgian Bay. And to me, this shot captures a lot about what this kind of travel is all about. And it's probably quite a bit different from what most people think of when you talk about sailing. So I'm going to start there. What do we think about when we think about sailing? I think for most people, sailing looks something like this in their minds. It's big, expensive boats. They're complicated. They've got all kinds of strings to pull, and you've got, crews, multi-person crews. You've got a captain. Maybe you're doing some yacht racing. You're doing some ocean voyages, and it's just intimidating. The amount of money and know-how to get on one of those boats and do anything. If you haven't grown up sailing, it can be really hard to imagine how are you ever going to be part of that world, right? It seems like maybe it's just a little bit closed off. And of course, at the bottom in red, dollar signs, right? Sailing, this kind of sailing is expensive, or it can be very expensive. So that's what I think most people have in mind, the glamorous, the America's Cup, the races, all of this stuff. And that's sailing. That's one part of sailing. But what it means to me is something different. You can see in the photo here, this is the little sailboat that I built in, well, a couple of different garages, I guess. I took over a friend's garage for a couple of years and built this boat. So what does sailing mean to me? I came from a family that had nothing to do with sailing. I didn't grow up sailing. I was in my 20s before I ever set foot on a sailboat, and I didn't really get started in this till well into adulthood. But here's what I've learned. Sailing, for me, this kind of sailing means little boats. That boat in the photo, that's about the size of a canoe. It's simple. I have one rope to pull. That's it. And instead of the big social gatherings, the races, the multi-person crew, this is a boat that takes me on adventures. So it brings me, when I want to, brings me to solitude. And I think of this as, like I said, a mode of wilderness travel, and kind of a backpacker style, with the tremendous advantage as I get older that I don't actually have to carry anything, but I'm moving silently through the wilderness. I don't have a motor, right? I'm quiet. I see lots of wildlife. I have all the gear I would have for car camping, but I don't have to be in a car. And the boat carries everything. So it's like backpacking without having to carry anything. And how cool is that? So it's a tiny little corner of the sailing world, and it's one that fits especially well in the Midwest, which I hope you will find out as we go on. So I kind of think of, in the early 1970s, kayaking was just becoming popular. It was a niche sport. And I think this kind of small sailboat travel is right where kayaking was before it became popular. Nobody does this stuff unless they somehow stumble into that world. So let's take a look a little more. So go small. You don't need a big expensive boat. That means if you don't need a big expensive boat, you can probably go now. And in the sailing world, this little niche, the kind of sailing that I do around the Midwest, is typically called something like sail and oar cruising. So French boat designers in the 1980s started using traditional fishing boats and small boats for recreation, and they didn't put motors on them. So your auxiliary power here is just a pair of oars that you row. And this is what it means. That upper left-hand corner, beautiful fall day on the Chippewa River in northwestern Wisconsin. Bottom left, that's the Mississippi. So big river is perfect for a small sailboat. And then the photo on the right, that's my brother in the boat he built in his garage. And that's again in the Canadian Great Lakes, one of the most fantastic wilderness areas around or within reach of the Midwest. And if you don't have some kind of a small boat or a kayak, you probably don't have access to it. So a small boat can bring you to places that without a boat, you'll never get to. All right, so where do you go? Like, we're in the Midwest. We're far thousands of miles from the oceans, right? You multi-day drive to get to either coast. Um, but take a look at this map. The upper Midwest is just this wonderland of opportunities for sailing all over the place. And I've circled just a few of the more obvious destinations, starting from the bottom, work our way kind of clockwise around this picture. Buckhorn State Park, kind of south central Wisconsin. Wonderful boat-in campsite, so you can pull your boat right up on the beach where your tent is set up, and it's just a great kind of a weekend getaway kind of adventure. Lake Pepin, if you're familiar with Wisconsin's west coast, as I like to call it, Lake Pepin and the area of the Chippewa River Delta and the whole Mississippi is perfect for small boat adventures. Popping up to the upper left, Lake of the Woods, way up on the Minnesota-Canada border. Yeah, it's a pretty long drive to get up there. Might be 7, 8 hours, depending where you're at in Wisconsin. But once you get there, you've got endless possibilities. Lake Nipigon, probably the most remote wilderness that I've ever traveled to. Once you leave the boat ramp, there's really nothing out on that lake but moose, wolves, islands, and lots of water. It's a big lake with almost no development, so you can really get lost in the wilderness there on your own. Coming over to the right-hand side, Georgian Bay, probably my current favorite place to go sailing. The Canadian side of Lake Huron is the sheltered arm of the lake, and the entire coastline, the north and eastern shoreline of Georgian Bay, is just a spectacular granite, rocky wilderness that's almost inaccessible if you don't have a boat of some kind. But if you have a boat, it's perfect. And then coming back to the center of the map, the Apostle Islands, anyone from Wisconsin probably doesn't need much of an introduction to them. But if you got a little boat like mine, you can reach places in the Apostles where, it'd be really impossible to get to without a boat. And then the Wisconsin flowages, there are a couple of, well, really three of them kind of in that general area: the turtle flambeau, the willow flowage, and the guile flowage, way up in northern Wisconsin. These are, again, perfect scale for a weekend getaway. So there's all kinds of places. You see, I kind of broke it up into three kinds of trips here. You've got your day trips. You're just going out for the afternoon, go out for the day. And anywhere you are in the Midwest, you probably have a river or some kind of a lake or a marsh nearby that's worth a day or two out on the water. Weekend trips, Buckhorn, the flowages of Wisconsin, Lake Pepin, these are great little short range adventures, right? You drive a few hours, you get to the place, you spend a night or two out on the water. And then if you really get hooked, like I have, you've got places like Lake Nipigon, Lake of the Woods, Georgian Bay, and maybe all the way to the coast. So I've got hooked bad enough that I've sailed my boat on the Texas coast, the Florida coast. You don't really need a big boat to take you out on some pretty big waters, once you know what you're doing. So the Midwest is not a coast. It's not a place people think of for sailing, but it really is just a wealth of opportunities to get out on the water and enjoy this kind of thing. So I'll take you through just a couple of trips that I've done. So I used to live in Chippewa Falls in northwest Wisconsin, and there's a boat ramp 8 city blocks from my house. So I used to go put my boat in the water on the river, and below the dam, there's this little mini wilderness that's perfect size to explore with a little boat like this. So that's right below the dam face, and there's all these rocks exposed, and you get up in there, and it's just really neat. You can see a little bit of what the river was like maybe before it was dammed, these beautiful cliffs and rocks. And again, I can go out for 2 hours, put my boat in the water and get out there. It's a mile or two to row up the river, and you enjoy a little day's outing, and you come back, you've been on the water, and it's a really nice way to get away for just a short little micro adventure. Another day trip when I was living up in Chippewa Falls, state parks are great. So many of them are on the water or have some kind of water. Brunei Island is on the Chippewa River, and you can see it's right, that bridge there is the town of Cornell in northern Wisconsin. And this is what it's like. You go out for a day, it's, a half-hour drive from my home, and I'm on the water and I'm sailing. Or in the smaller waters, you get inside the small channels and you're just rowing around. This particular adventure, these two photos are taken from a day when I took off work because I had a dentist appointment in the morning, and then I didn't feel like going back to work, so I took the whole day off and I just spent the day exploring the river. When I'm done, put the boat on the trailer and bring it right back home, and it's a really easy, fast getaway to adventure. And of course, fall, like boating season, is probably September, early October, some of my favorite times to be out on the water. Really was glad I took the whole day off after my dentist appointment, because this was a far better use of my time that day, I think, than being at work. Um, Once you start getting a little comfortable with your boat, you can start doing a little bit of longer trips. Wisconsin, it dawns on me that after I built my boat, that Wisconsin is really almost surrounded by water on three sides. You've got Lake Superior, you've got Lake Michigan, and this trip was to Lake Pepin, which is basically a big wide spot on the Mississippi River. And this was a trip I took right in the middle of the summer of 2020. So COVID-19 had shut everything down. This was a really popular county park on the Minnesota side of the river near Lake City, and there was nobody there. So I sailed up, anchored my boat right offshore, and I had the whole park to myself. I think this was a trip I spent 3 days out there. And you can see, you don't need an ocean. Lake Pepin is plenty big enough water for a little boat like mine. I'll draw your attention to a couple of things here. So how hard is sailing? Well, I don't look like I'm working real hard in that photo, do I? You can see in the lower left-hand corner, I've got the sheet. That's the name for the rope that controls the sail. That's really the only control I have to worry about in my boat. And when the wind is steady, I've tied that off with a knot that will come undone with one little tug on it. And so I'm hands-free. On this particular trip, I had ordered myself a Pizza Hut pizza. And while my boat sailed itself across the lake to my campsite, I was basically hanging out and enjoying some pizza while the boat really took care of itself without me worrying too much about it. But you can see the bluffs, the big water. You don't have to go far. Once you're on the water, you're kind of in this shadowy margins of the world where nobody who's not in a boat is even going to notice that you're there. And so many times that's like the best part of having a little boat is sneaking along the watery edges of the world where nobody will even notice that you're there. And it's a world that you really can't get to without a kayak, a canoe, or a small boat of some kind. Once you have a boat like that, it opens up all the possibilities in the world, even in the landlocked Midwest. Um, Once you get to the stretch of where you're ready to go out on a little bigger adventures, weekend trips. Probably my all-time favorite Wisconsin destination for this kind of travel is the Turtle Flambeau flowage. You can see it marked with the blue dot on the map there. The Turtle Flambeau flowage is the DNR term for a lake system that's created by a dam. So it floods out some rivers and creates basically a big lake system that has drowned out the low spots, but all of the high spots are left as islands. So the Turtle Flambeau has, I don't know, something like 200 islands, almost 15,000 acres of water, all connected. And the best part about this place is it's got about 60 campsites scattered around all of the islands, and they are free. So there's no fees, there's no registration, there's no red tape. Even if you want to reserve them ahead of time, you can't. They're just first come, first served campsites. So very much the first place I go when it gets warm enough to be on the water, and the last place I go in late fall when it's almost too cold to be out on the water is the Turtle Flambeau. It's perfect for a 2, 3, 4 night getaway adventure at a small scale. And again, in that other photo, you can see I'm in the boat in the front, and my brother is taking a photo from his own boat. And I guess that's a good moment to point out that that's one of the really cool things about having small boats is everyone gets their own boat. And I will tell you that sailing is a lot more exciting when you're the captain than when you're just a passive passenger sitting aboard the boat. And this way, I've done trips where I've taken two people in the same boat. That's its own kind of fun. But probably my favorite way of traveling is when my brother and I or friend and I go out and we each have our own boat. And you can sail in company. Um, but you're in control of your own destiny. It's just really satisfying to be in control of your own little boat. And again, especially if you're new to it and you're a little nervous about what this stuff is like, you've got somebody nearby who can lend a hand if you do get yourself in trouble, or if you're not sure, can we go here? Is this a dumb idea? So the multi-boat trip, Turtle Flambeau, is perfect for this. I've gone there, I don't know, I've been going there since 2009, and it's just like a wonderland. Um, Here it is again. You can see there's enough open water to be excellent sailing. There's islands everywhere. There's little narrow channels that you can sneak through under oars. So it's really a fantastic introduction to wilderness travel in a small sailboat. If you're at all interested in this kind of thing, and I'm assuming you are, or you might not, you wouldn't be watching this presentation, um, this would be the first place I would set my sights on going once you feel like you're ready for an overnight trip in your boat. It's magical. And once you get there, you will understand. So the logical progression, you've got your trips where you're out for the afternoon, then you start doing an overnight, maybe a long weekend on the Turtle Flambeau. And if you're like me, it doesn't take long before you start to be attracted to the idea of doing longer journeys. Um, and think of this as the kind of vacation you might invest in a big drive to go out to Yellowstone or the Rocky Mountains. Um, but you don't always have to go west. If you turn your sights toward Ontario, this is 10 or 12 hours away to reach this Georgian Bay circled in yellow on this map. So driving around the north side of Lake Michigan, it's just a beautiful drive. And basically one long day of driving gets you to this wonderland of Georgian Bay. And Georgian Bay has the north and eastern corner of the map there in the yellow circle. That's a region called the 30,000 Islands. And if anything, that's probably an underestimate of how many islands there are. And islands are the magic of small boat sailing because if there's lots of islands, there's lots of places to camp. There's lots of shelter, so you duck behind an island to get out of the wind if it's getting stormy. It's just a really interesting and safe way to travel when you've got lots and lots of islands. The 30,000 Islands region of Georgian Bay is actually the world's largest freshwater archipelago. So there's nowhere in the world with more islands packed into a tight grouping like Georgian Bay. And it is, in fact, it's also a UNESCO biosphere reserve. So this is something the UNESCO has recognized as almost unique in the world. And part of what makes it cool is you'll see in the photos, this is the Canadian Shield or the Laurentian Shield terrain. So that's an area of the north that it just barely reaches northern Wisconsin in a few places, but north of Wisconsin and into Canada is this huge expanse of terrain where glaciers in the last ice age have basically slid across the land and scraped all of the topsoil right off of the land. And what it ends up with is you expose all of the granite bedrock. And here you see what a typical campsite in Georgian Bay is like. So this was from a trip I did last summer, and you can see our tents are set ashore. It's just bare, smooth, flat granite, so easy tent camping. You don't need to really find a clear spot. There's just all these granite domes and granite slabs everywhere. So this was my friend Jay and I sharing the boat. So we had two people in one boat, and this was Jay's first trip, so I was trying to introduce him to this kind of small boat sailing and sail and oar cruising. And he's a windsurfer, so he knows kind of the basics of sailing, but he had never been in a boat much. I couldn't pry him away from the controls. He held the tiller and he controlled the boat for our entire week-long trip. And then your reward after a day of sailing and rowing is setting up camp in a beautiful wilderness like this. So just really amazing. I think the longest trip that I've done on Georgian Bay was about three weeks, and I only covered about a third of the coast. So you could easily spend an entire summer here and never run out of things to see. Um, you can see in the center, just this barely can see this little white bucket. So in the wilderness, you're camping near water. Waste disposal is an issue, easily taken care of. Today, we've got all kinds of technology to handle that. You've got sealable bags to take care of your waste, and you pack it out. So that's our bucket toilet. So it comes with a little toilet seat. So it's a step up in comfort from backpacking because I'm not going to carry a toilet on my backpack, but it's easy to put it in the boat. And as you can see, we've got perfectly flat campsites and just hanging out at the water's edge. The loons are everywhere, bald eagles everywhere. There's a rare breed of rattlesnake that you run into occasionally in these islands. And what sets Georgian Bay apart from Lake Superior, another thing I really like, is that the water by midsummer is warm enough to swim very comfortably. So you go for a long swim every evening once you get to camp. And like I say, it's probably my favorite long distance cruising area. Here's another shot of Georgian Bay. This is about 8 miles from the boat ramp where I normally launch the boat, in an area called the Fox Islands. And you can see the water's crystal clear. You've got that spectacular granite of the Canadian Shield. It's got that electric orange lichen growing over it, tall white pines everywhere. And there's nobody there. My friend and I were out for 9 days on our trip last summer, and I think we never saw another boat the entire time. Occasionally you'll run into people kayaking, but the boat in this photo, my boat, is so small that it can sail in about 7 inches of water. So you can sail it right up onto a beach. Anywhere, almost anywhere a kayak can go, my boat can go. And with the added advantage that where a kayak always has to be paddling, my boat, once you hit open water and there's a decent breeze, you hoist the sail and your work is done. It's a wonderful way to travel. So Georgian Bay, easily my favorite area right now. Another place that I mentioned earlier is Lake Nipigon. So I kind of discovered this one when I was just paging through a road atlas, and I discovered this giant lake north of Lake Superior where I had never knew it was there really. And I immediately started thinking about, I need to go put a boat on there and just explore that wilderness up there. There's woodland caribou in the northern reaches of the lake. There's wolves, there's bears, there's all kinds of things that you just never would see around Wisconsin. So I took the drive up there. The problem was I didn't have a boat. I was in the process of building my boat, but luckily my brother had a boat. So I just kind of borrowed his. And this is what it's like on Lake Nipigon. Again, I was out for 9 days and I never saw another boat the entire time. It's probably the most remote wilderness I've ever visited. And without a boat, I would never get to see it. You can see this is pretty rustic, it's backpacker style camping, except you don't have to carry anything. And so this particular campsite, I woke up in the morning and crawled out of that tent you can see in the photo, and there were fresh moose tracks between my tent and the water. And so there went all my illusions that I was a light sleeper, because apparently some moose walked right past my tent and I never heard them in the night. Um, and then the picture on the right, um, one of the best things about getting out on the water in these remote areas is you're not connected. There's no cell phones, there's no internet. So I like to write in a journal. And you can see what I'm doing in that photo is I'm sleeping at anchor. Lake Nipigon has a lot of islands that are so thickly forested that you can't even find room to set up a tent. So I've got a little tarp rigged over my boat for a tent to keep the rain off or the dew, and you sleep aboard at anchor. There's a little platform that you can set up to basically give yourself a, a flat sleeping place that's just as good as a bed. And frankly, it's probably more comfortable than sleeping ashore. You get rocked to sleep a little bit and tiny ripples in the waves. So I like this set of photos because it shows you both, right? Sometimes it's easy. You've got a flat beach or you've got that smooth granite slab. It's easy to carry a tent to shore and sleep on land. Or if there's nowhere to get to land, or if it's private property and you're not allowed to camp on land, you can toss an anchor overboard in a little sheltered nook and just sleep aboard under a tent. It's really a best of both worlds, right? You can use whatever option suits the situation. So that I went, I could geek out and I could go on for a lot longer than 45 minutes about all the wonderful trips I've done. But again, my aim with this presentation is just to introduce you to the idea that this kind of sailing is within your reach. You don't have to have the big, fancy, expensive boat. You don't have to have grown up at the yacht club learning how to sail from the time you were 8 years old. You can jump into this as an adult with no experience whatsoever and just get yourself into this wonderful world of small boat sailing or cruising. You do need the right kind of boat. I mean, granted, you could go out in any kind of boat, but there's a particular set of characteristics that really make this kind of travel work. And you can see that if you want to have one or two people aboard, that seems to be pretty standard among the people who do this kind of thing. People like solo trips, or they like to bring a friend along. But it's pretty rare to pack more people in than that. So you're looking for a boat that's 15 to 18 feet long. And as you saw in all of the photos in this presentation, these are all open boats. They don't have a cabin. There's no going below to your little galley and your bunks. Your boat is a transportation. It's an open boat because your oar power is your engine. And if you had a cabin on that boat, it's going to be a lot harder to row because of the wind resistance or the air resistance. So you've got sail for when the wind is good, and you've got oars for when there's no wind or when the wind is from the wrong direction. It's really handy to have the capability, as I said, to sleep aboard. So many, especially on the smaller adventures, a small local river, a pond right in the middle of town, you're not going to be able to set up a campsite on shore. There's probably private property or it's no trespassing, but it doesn't matter. If you have a boat tucked into shore, you throw out your anchor, and if you can sleep aboard comfortably, that's a huge advantage that canoes and kayaks don't really share. And then the last advantage is these boats are lightweight. The boat in the photo here, that's my boat in the process of being built, weighs less than 300 pounds. So I can tow that, and I have towed that behind my little 4-cylinder hatchback, 240,000 miles on that car, and it still pulls my boat up to Canada. It's really a huge advantage. Your boat lives at home in your backyard or in your garage on a trailer. When you want to go on an adventure, you hook it up to your little car and you go. So there's no paying for marina fees. There's no paying for a slip to keep it on the water. It's really simple. And you can see it's pretty simple to build. It's pretty much you get plans that show you how to cut out what shape and dimensions every piece in the boat is. This particular boat is strip planked, so you set up those shapes like slices of bread where the boat is sliced into sections like this, and you take the dimensions from the plans and then you bend strips of wood around that and you glue them together, and boom, you've got a boat. My brother, I think, built his boat in about 11 months. I built mine probably in about 14 months, spread over 7 years. I moved several times and oftentimes didn't have access to work on the boat, but probably within a year and a half of part-time work, evenings, some weekends, you can build a boat like this. You can also buy one on the used market. Um, I was looking just today before the presentation. A boat of this size with these capabilities might cost you somewhere between $4,000 to $5,000 used. Um, you probably can't buy one new because nobody makes them. All of these boats are pretty much custom one-off builds. And so one of the best ways to get one is to build it yourself. You jump in and you've got that learning curve where you're learning new skills. I never built a boat before, but I ended up with a beautiful boat at the end of my time, and that just adds to the satisfaction. When I'm camped out in the wilderness and I look at my boat floating on its anchor, and I'm like, I built that. I can't even believe it. It's got all those beautiful curves, and believe me, if someone like me can build a boat like that, someone like you can do it and probably do a better job. So that's the boat you need. It's not much bigger than a canoe, big enough for 1 or 2 people, and light enough so you can tow it 10, 12 hours to get to a wilderness like Lake Nipigon or Georgian Bay, and it's just a fantastic adventure. I mentioned the sleep aboard capability, so I thought it would be worthwhile taking a look at. There's two basic variations on how to achieve sleep aboard capability. And you can see here's the top left photo here. That's my boat. And this is the Turtle Flambeau flowage in northern Wisconsin again. Um, and this was kind of my test run. I bought a tiny little backpacker tent. The Eureka is the brand name, and that's their solo tent. But you can get small backpacking tents that will actually fit on your boat. So my boat has a platform that fits between the benches. So when I'm ready to sleep aboard, I put the extra planks in to make a continuous platform, and then I can set up my tent right in the boat. And the beautiful thing about that is you're bug free, right? Once you zip that tent closed, the mosquitoes are not going to be bothering you, and you've got this snug little world where you're just rocked to sleep in your own boat, and it's just the coolest thing. Um, and of course, you don't have to even have a campsite available. I could tie up right next to private property. I could tie up on an island where there's no open space to set up a tent, and I don't need it. I just unroll my little, set up my platform and put a tent on there, and that's one way to do it. Another way to do it, as you can see in the bottom right-hand corner, this is a boat tent. So to make a custom cover, custom tent that fits over the entire boat. And you can see the sides flip up and you can crawl in there and you've got room to sleep in your boat. That particular photo is from a trip that my wife and I did this past summer. That's a traditional rowing boat on the Thames River. We basically rowed from Oxford to London. It took us 6 days this summer. And each night we tie up to shore and we set up our boat tent, and we're free from the rain, the dew, we're dry, we're safe, we're comfortable. And again, that extra bit of magical, snug hidey hole when you're sleeping aboard your boat, it's really special. Um, so those are the two basic variations. You can create a tent or buy a commercial tent that fits on the boat that you already have, or you can create a custom boat tent that covers the entire boat. That's actually probably the better option. I'm going to be looking at building something like that for my own boat, because then you're free to move around the entire boat. You can sit anywhere. It's much more comfortable living. Now, you're not going to have standing headroom in there, but you've got comfortable sitting headroom. You can cook a meal inside your boat with a boat tent like that. That's really the perfect way to manage that when you're not allowed to camp ashore, or there's no place convenient for camping ashore. And I'll mention a third option. Um, Whoops, let me go back. A lot of people will take a commercial backpacking tent that doesn't quite fit on their boat, and they will cut the bottom out of it and set it up on the edges of their boat, so there's no floor to the tent anymore, but the tent itself is over the boat, so it's going to keep you dry. So that sleep aboard capacity, I think, is what is that final step that really makes all kinds of adventures available to you. So there's no way that I can teach you to build a boat in a 45-minute presentation. And my hope is that if you're interested, I can at least show you where you can find out what you need to know. So I've got a list here of options to kind of learn what you need to build your own boat, or to find a boat to buy. The top website there, Duckworks Boat Builder Supply, that's where I got started. That was the center of this boat building community of people just jumping in and building boats in their backyards and their garages. And everything you need to build a boat is there. You go to that website and you can find plans that you can follow to build the boat. You can find all of the hardware that you need. You can have them make a sail for you. You can buy the glue. Most modern boats are built with epoxy glue. It's a two-part glue that's super strong and super waterproof. So everything you can need, from the plans to the materials to build your boat, you can get it at Duckworks. Wooden Boat magazine is the home of traditional boat building in the US. It's out in Maine is their headquarters, and they are the ones that kickstarted the return to traditional wooden boats in the early 1970s. And their website has a store, obviously, where you can go and buy plans for all kinds of boats. You can buy books that will teach you how to build boats. You can buy supplies. It's well worth checking out. Common Sense Boats is another great one, especially for beginners. If you are interested and you're like, oh, that looks complicated, it's intimidating, I don't think I can build a boat, this is the place to start, because Common Sense Boats is simple plywood boats, mostly with flat bottoms, really cheap and simple. My first boat that I built was in that mode. It had a flat bottom. I got the plans from Common Sense Boats. Um, it's built out of plywood, and it took me about 3 weeks from starting to buy the stuff I needed to launching my boat on the water. It's really no more complicated than building a box that's pointy at one end. And you can do a lot in a simple, cheap boat like that. My first trip to the Canadian Great Lakes, I spent 20 days camping out of that little boat that I spent less than $300 on. Chesapeake Lightcraft, again, another website with just hundreds of boat designs where you can buy plans or even kits where they will cut out all of the parts for your boat for you, ship it to you, and then all you're doing is putting it together. It really can speed up the construction of a boat. And if you're not quite sure on your skills, like, am I going to cut things out so they fit together right? A kit can be a great way to start. So CLC boats, very much worth a look. And then the bottom two are not websites so much as they are schools. Wooden Boat Magazine runs a school every summer out in Maine. They've got a campus on the Maine coast, and you can go and enroll there. You can learn specific boat building techniques in different classes, or they have some classes where you go to the class and you spend 2 weeks attending class every day, and when you go home, you've got a boat hull on your trailer that you've built in the past 2 weeks. And then you go home and put the finishing touches on it. So it's a really good way to learn to be a boat builder, to build a boat, or have professionals really help you build most of your boat so you can finish it at home. And the Scamp Camp is the same thing at thepocketyacht.com. Scamp is a wonderful design by a friend of mine, a New Zealand boat designer named John Welsford. And he designed this little 12-foot cruising boat and that has proven to be immensely popular among people who do this kind of sailing. And the Scamp Camp, I believe, is 2 weeks long, and you pay your fees, you go to this camp, and at the end of your 2 weeks, you've got the entire hull for a little cruising sailboat built, and you haul it home on a trailer, and you finish it at home. So there are all kinds of ways to help you get started, and hopefully some of these will be just what you need to know. So sadly, we are at the very end of my 45 minutes. If we want to leave time for the Q&A, I'm going to leave it here with just a couple more photos. You can see, I like these two together because I think they capture the real magic of these boats. The left-hand photo, again, that's me and my brother sailing the big waters of Georgian Bay. We've got 50 miles of open water off to our left. And we're in our separate boats. We each get to be the captain, and we can cover 30, 40, 50 miles a day when the wind is good. But at the same time, the same boat on the right-hand photo, that's my friend Jay, we're in this tiny little canyon back on the coastline that just runs for miles up the French River in Ontario. And you could never sail there because the cliffs block the wind. But with a boat like mine, you don't need to sail there. You can row or even paddle like my friend is doing there. So it's an incredibly versatile way of traveling through the wilderness, and just really magical. So I hope I've sparked some interest. I'm going to break out of my screen share right now and see if there's anything going on in the Q&A.
I can unmute myself here. Um, Alrighty, Tom. So it looks like one of the questions we are going to have is all together with the pattern and your supplies, how much did your first boat cost you to put together?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I should have included a picture of my first boat because my first boat was a simple flat bottom skiff, basically like 3 sheets of plywood, like a box that's pointy on one end. That cost less than $300. I made the sail out of a plastic tarp that was stuck together with double-sided carpet tape. And that was the boat that took me on my first really big adventures, a week-long cruise on the Texas coast and a 20-day trip in Georgia on the Canadian Great Lakes. So the first boat, $300, and less than a month. The boat in most of the photos there, probably about 14 months of building time. And I think this was pre-COVID prices, so it'd probably be more expensive now, but probably somewhere just over $2,000. If I were going to buy a boat like that used, I might expect to pay 5 to 7,000. But of course, it takes a lot more time to build than it does to buy one.
And do you need a regular license to operate your boat?
Ah, so the only license you need is a driving license to get it to the water. The beautiful thing about, especially with no motors, um, is very typically the rules vary from state to state, but oftentimes with a boat without an engine, registration is much cheaper, or even sometimes some states you don't need to register a boat without an engine. So yeah, the no license. I kind of discovered how to sail with my brother through reading a couple books from the library and a lot of trial and error, which was mostly error at first. Um, but it is a pretty simple process.
I would say, is there any, do you know of classes around the area of Wisconsin here that would teach you how to operate a boat like that, either sailing or
Yeah, that is a great question. There is an operation up in Green Bay called Hands on Deck. It's a nonprofit, and they build traditional wooden boats, and they do all kinds of classes. I'm not sure if they're entirely youth centered, but they teach youth classes. I'm guessing, I'm almost sure that there's room to be involved as an adult as well. So, top of my head, Hands on Deck in Green Bay would be the place to check that out.
and When you are boating, is there any research that you have to conduct to ensure that you're not camping or docking on a private property?
So yeah, luckily that's pretty easy to do with the age of the internet. And part of the reason I like doing this in Canada is um, most of the places where I have sailed, Georgian Bay, Lake of the Woods, Lake Nipigon, that's public land. They call it Crown land. And so you get a permit ahead of time from one of their ministry offices, and it's $10 a night. And um, you're not tied to a specific campsite. As long as you've got the permit, you can camp anywhere on Crown land. If there's any doubt about that, like in other waters, when I know I'm in land that's not public land, that's why I really like to have that sleep aboard capacity in my boat, because the water is always public. So as long as I'm anchored in the water and my tent is on my boat, I'm not going to be in trouble with anybody.
Okay, if there are any last minute Q&As, go ahead and put that in the Q&A function. But I have a personal question. When that was, you were talking about, New Zealand and London. How big is this boating community?
It's pretty small in the US and it's much bigger elsewhere. There's kind of a hotbed on the Maine coast and then in the Pacific Northwest. Those are probably the two biggest US centers of wooden boat building and small boat cruising like this. Um, the UK in Britain is just a much more sailing centered culture. It's much easier to find used boats to buy. There are organizations there, and one that I should have put on the website, the Dinghy Cruising Association. So dinghy is what the British would call a small boat like mine. It's a You pay a membership fee. I think it's $30 a month, and then you're part of this community online discussion boards and things of people who do this kind of cruising all of the time. And there are a couple of chapters in the US, one of them right based out of Milwaukee. That's a pretty new arm of. So if you look at DCA, Dinghy Cruising Association online, that's a great way to connect with people who are part of this world.
Oh, we had a question. Are boat rentals available around Georgian Bay? I think that'd probably be a good question to expand beyond that. And if you're not able to either purchase or make your own boat, is boat rentals a kind of easy thing to do in the areas you've been to?
So I would say kayaks are available most places where there's boating, but a sailboat like mine, um, I would be really surprised if anyone ever found a place to rent one in the US or in Canada. It's just such a niche thing that there's not enough of a market to serve. On the other hand, that boat that I showed you with the boat tent on the Thames River in the UK, we rented that. So again, Europe and especially northern France and England are much more open to um, people build these boats, they use them, they rent them. But here in the US, I don't think you'd ever have any luck trying to rent a boat like this, sadly.
So are there any kayak rentals or anything like that around Georgian Bay then?
Yeah, there's probably the most popular launch place there is the town of Killarney, Ontario, and it's right on the water. And there's an outfitters in town or just outside of town um, that do guided kayak trips, or um, I'm not sure because I've never rented from them, but they might well rent boats for unguided trips as well. Yeah, Georgian Bay is just as good to explore with a kayak as it would be with a small sailboat. Absolutely.
Okay, and I'm not seeing any more questions, but before we close this out, I think, Tom, I'd like to know what's your next vacation? Where are you heading next with your boat? The weather's been very nice, and hopefully it stays that way for a little bit longer.
That is a great question, and it's been on my mind this weekend with the weather as good as it is. Almost certainly, the first place I'll go this spring will be the Turtle Flambeau Flowage. That's just a magical place. But I do have a substantial chunk of time off in August, which it's always likely that I'll go to Georgian Bay again. That's just magical. There's also a giant lake way up near the Arctic Circle in Canada called Great Slave Lake. And it's about a 2,500-mile drive up there. But there is a road all the way to Whitehorse, and then just this huge wilderness of islands and channels. And someday, before I get too old and decrepit to quit doing this thing, I'm going to haul a boat up there. Ice out happens in late June, so you can spend the entire month of July exploring the lake and then make it back, hopefully in one piece.
Oh, that sounds absolutely fantastic. And yes, I hope the weather definitely stays as nice as it has been for you in your upcoming vacations. Are there any other places people can either contact you for questions regarding your boating, or do you have any social media to showcase your different travels?
So I do have a website which is probably sadly in need of an update, but it would just be my name, tompamperin.com. That's more, uh, there's a little bit of boating related stuff on there. Um, and the Wooden Boat Forum, which is just woodenboatforum.com, is a great source, not just for me. I do often make trip reports with lots of photos there, but all kinds of people who are into this kind of boat building and sailing will post trip reports and journals of building their next boat and things. So you can really learn a lot about building and sailing on the Wooden Boat Forum.
All right. Well, thank you so much for sharing your expertise and your experiences with us tonight, Tom.
Yeah, thank you, Christina, and thanks to the museum for hosting. It's a little bit outside the normal spectrum of topics the museum might cover, but I'm really happy to have a chance to share something that I just really love, and I would love to see more people have the chance to try it out.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much. And thank you as well, those who are participating with us today and watching this Winter Lyceum series. We will be finishing this up for the night. So thank you so much. And hopefully we'll see you again next Sunday on Zoom. So have a good rest of your evening.
All right, thank you. Happy sailing.